joining us on this. Thank you, Holly. Appreciate that. Thank you for joining us on this fine Wednesday morning. Really appreciate y'all's time. We've got a really good session in store. We've got some stragglers popping in though, so we're gonna give it a few moments before we jump into session. So if you need to go grab yourself a cup of coffee or need to handle anything for a minute or two, you have a little bit of time. We just want to ensure that we get a good group in. We'll probably kick everything off here in about 5 minutes. Okay, about 7:35 Mountain Time. And so if you need a minute, you've got it. And if you have any questions or anything like that, and you don't have audio capability, go ahead and type in that chat so that we can be sure to address any of your concerns or talk about any of the things that maybe you would like to bring up. So here in about 5 minutes, we'll get this show going. Okay, good morning, everybody. We will probably get a few stragglers popping in, but to respect everybody's time and to get this fine Wednesday rolling, we're going to go ahead and get started. This safety forum will be recorded, so later on today, you should see a communication come out with today's recording, and I believe we'll talk about it during the presentation. We might be able to get you the presentation today. So thank you everybody for joining us for this fine August 28th Wednesday. Hope everybody's being safe out there. Welcome to the Safety Forum. Today we've got awesome subject matter expert and a great subject dealing with what you all need to know as contractors and what you need to have in place when dealing with confined spaces. And hey, what is a confined space, right? And so we've got a great subject matter expert to help answer any of those questions and give us some guidance from OSHA. He is a compliance, safety, and health officer with OSHA out of the Denver region. And he's got an awesome presentation for us. And so we're really excited to be able to get you all some good information that you can take back to your organizations and put into play. But before we do that, I wanted to say good morning. It's good to see everybody. Unfortunately, in July, we had a scheduled safety tour, but we weren't able to lock in a location. So that's still on the book. There might be an impromptu, hey, come do a safety tour initiative going on. Aside from the regularly scheduled safety forums that we have moving forward, we might have an additional one just to be able to go take a look at a larger scale job sites and some of the protocols and some of the administrative and engineering controls that have to be put into place when it comes to large scale job sites and multiple trades out there in the area. So stay tuned for that. Wanted to ensure, because we didn't meet in July, to go over a really good conversation about near misses. Near misses, what it is that you've been able to address proactively so that you didn't have to be reactive to a safety issue. So wanted to see if there's anybody wanted to talk about anything, bring up anything, ask any questions about anything when it comes to what you've identified. We've got kind of a small group, but I'm sure somebody's noticed something.
Hey, Paul.
Joe, good morning.
Morning. I don't have any near misses. I was just gonna bring some comedy to it and say I was playing frisbee with my son the other day, and I threw the frisbee and I hit him in the face. So he should have had some eye protection on. Should have some goggles.
Get the helmet, right? Get the whole Milwaukee
had a
setup.
helmet on, man, but no goggles, no safety protection over his glasses, man. So
Man.
Yeah, but no, I don't have any near misses, but I wanted to have some comedy for the morning. So
yeah, that one area, right? Not covered. Dang,
Yeah, just trying to teach a 5-year-old how to catch a frisbee, that's
Well, hey, I hope everything turned out okay, and I hope the quick guards up there, you know what I mean? Well, that's cool. We say you're out there having some really good memories and life experiences with your kids.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, it's great to see you, Joe. And thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
Wow, you
doing
guys keeping it real easy. You're making life real easy on me. Go ahead. It's good to
I,
see you too, Shelby. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, we had a weird situation. It was about 2 weeks ago, and we get a message from a general contractor with a $17,000 bill for hitting prime power in a residential neighborhood, and we're like, no, we didn't. And they said, oh no, this is back in February. We're like, no, no, no. Now, granted, this is Texas, not Denver, but still, it's a yeah. And so we launched this about a week-long investigation trying to figure out why the hell we didn't report it. Why didn't we call 811 to report the issue? Why didn't we coordinate with the GC? Why didn't the safety director know anything about it? Why does nobody know anything about it? Why did this guy just walk away? And it took us about a week worth of going back and forth between everybody to figure out it was a subcontractor that did this. And it wasn't even our subcontractor. And that's where, was it a near miss? Yes, but just trying to figure out the command and control from records back in February, we were trying to pull, okay, who was in the neighborhood on that day? And man, that's frustrating. So, and I sent out this long email, this long, like we've got to do better. Than 2 days later, be like, never mind, false call, not even us.
Joe, you're acting like you know exactly what Shelby's talking about, man. You want to elaborate on some of your experiences?
No, it's just it's those kind of things where it's all that the controls, right? You have, like how we used to be like before we have our new software called Build Ops. Like that's an absolute nightmare. Trying to go back all the way to February, trying to figure out where everybody was, what was going on, and doing all that. Now we have a software that we can kind of track that. But before, man, we used to have just sheets and trying to figure out like if we still have the sheet somewhere of where people were and who was on the job and if we
Or
had
like daily logs, right? Or something like that. You got to check out the physical daily log for that day, that piece of paper that's in a file somewhere that you haven't seen in 3 months, something like that.
They were
yeah,
digging through work orders, like pieces of paper. I'm like, what are we doing?
yeah,
That brings up a really good point talking, Joe, about a software, right? Because we always want to be results and solutions oriented, right? So maybe we need to, with our forum, really take a look at what type of safety softwares are out there to make streamlining safety communication, daily JSAs, things like that, a little easier to track so that if you do have to go way back on some type of legend, that you've got a way to, navigate it and get the answers that you need.
I got two things on that one. I just had John Rosas, this is like 3 days ago, out of Houston. He sent me some new software where they're tracking energization. Like it's literally a digital one line, and it's strictly for energization, strictly for lock on, lock off protocols. And just from a bird's eye view, like from an energization marshal on a data center or in a hospital or anything with a massive any place that has like more than 100 locks and there's one dude carrying those keys around, this could look fantastic. It's the lock on lock off logs. It's the who authorized the energization. The superintendent already pre-assigns who has to sign off before it can pop off.
So talking about somebody with the general contractor that has that as part of, or the subcontractor.
Traditionally, it's the electricians on the job. This is Texas, maybe it's different, but traditionally, as electricians, we go in and we say, "Oh no, it's ours," even though it's kind of not really ours. But we still go in and say, "Oh no, it's ours," and you're going to leave us alone, and you're going to let us energize before you do anything else. You could put a lock on too, Mister GC, but you're not lighting our people up.
I got you. I got you.
And
Because we're in
so,
charge of all the electrical on the site, right? When
yes,
work's going on. So
the only weird place we get into is when the GC buys third-party generators. And so sometimes we'll have to go play with those a little bit, but for the most part, when it comes to all the electricity on the site, that's we want to own as much as possible.
okay. Yeah.
So, and that's where
Yeah, but that's a resource, right? So I mean that's the hard part is that's a resource of somebody you've got to have. Right, all good things, you know what I mean? But yeah, administrative controls does it have to be, if you've got a really large job site where you've got, multiple, right, stages of the job going on when it comes to electrical, you almost need somebody really dedicated to that whenever at need. They're basically on call the entire day to be able to do this, that, and the other. So that's a dedication of really a position within your company, you know
What
what I
we
mean?
did, yeah, what we did for the data centers in San Antonio, which is like Microsoft big data centers, is we had a 22-year-old kid who his only job was to carry the keys around and unlock what the senior superintendent told him to unlock. Because I would have senior superintendent sitting in the office looking at the one lines, going, okay, nope, yep, that's agreed, good to go. And then the foreman is right there, and the kid pops like literally that was the process we set up, and it works flawlessly.
Well,
Um,
that's something that, we might have to take a look at that outline, Shelby,
sure,
and get with, yourself or some other,
sure.
resources on, different administrative controls to do that,
That's
kind of
and
how the
that's
outline works. And we'd love to talk about that more in the future. Yeah.
yeah, that's old school technology. That's prison key turn technology.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a new concept at
Yeah.
all,
Now the
but
other
putting
thing
it
I
into
wanted
play.
to talking about software, my only man, I love software and I love what it can do. My only problem with most safety software is it's just too dadgum bulky. Like
It's not user friendly, right?
it's because it's as a safety person, and maybe I'm the only one. Maybe it's just me, but as a safety person, I want something to where people can turn in incident reports. I want something to where we can track field audits. It'd be nice to have a dashboard that kind of shows how all of the components are based off of what we want. Uh,
Sure.
Maybe something we could sign out PPE. That's cool too. Um, but typically, you're not going to find, at least in my experience, you're not going to find a software that's only that. It's all these other. Oh, well, we can track all your tools too, and we can also
Shelby,
track
it sounds like
your.
we have an opportunity here, man.
Put me in a room with a software
We could
person.
call it
I will
Simply
show you
Safe.
the program we want. We want a closed program. I want my foreman to be able to see what my employees' training is. It's simple, but everybody wants to throw all these other things in, and it becomes as big as SAP to where it's this big giant clunky $7 gazillion per user thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's another good focus we can take a look at. You know what I mean? Is there something out there that can streamline some of these processes to a user-friendly, fast, and effective uh way, right, of documenting and ensuring, right, those check boxes are made. So I think that's something I've got it written down on the list, and so I think that that's something we can focus in on. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, for sure. Does anybody else have any other things? Now, I want to say thank you so much, Shelby. And IEC National and Milwaukee Tool. Shelby and I just got back from the IEC National Safety Summit, and there were some great topics, that they discussed there. Milwaukee, we're very honored to be able to go to their helmet plant where they make their new, I think they're version 1 and version 2 helmets, or safety classification 2 helmets. Really awesome stuff. Milwaukee is doing their part, I think, to try and make our industry a lot safer. They had they've also got some great cutting gloves, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the different classifications of their gloves. So we had, they showed us a lot about that. And then they've got some tools. They did an ergonomics kind of thing about their tools and what it is they try and do when they design their tools, so that you're not wearing out, you're not wearing out your arms, you're not wearing out your body by using, right, those types of tools, as well as vibration gloves. I just wanted to bring that out, right? We all know that the thicker the pair of gloves we have is going to help us with some vibration when it comes to some of our machinery and equipment. But they really have gone to the next level, and they've got gloves that are specifically designed for that vibration. I can't remember the name of the condition, but that constant vibration in your hands does cause, some long-lasting damage when it comes to your hands and your nervous systems.
Yeah,
And so they're
I
really
call
trying
it
to
I call it white noise. I think it's called like white finger or something like
Yeah,
that.
white finger syndrome or white finger condition, something like that. But it's not a good thing. And so if you're doing a lot of, if you're out there with a whacker, right, and you are, doing an entire job site in, packing soil down, or if you've got, hammer drills that you're on all day that are shaking and rattling, anything that's got a pretty steady and constant vibration, you're going to want to, maybe invest in a pair of vibration resistant gloves. Okay, so they've got. I think that's an awesome thing. I'm gonna get a pair for my motorcycle. You know what I mean? Because I can tell you after riding 300-400 miles, my arm's going, I'm done with this. You know what I mean? Some other cool things that came out of that safety summit was, Federated. They did a really cool piece on risk management and how risk management, but being able to identify possible things, that can impact your company, right? And one of the big messages that they wanted to bring out was your company culture, right? So we talk about safety and we talk about bottom lines, right? We're talking about the impacts of, hey, somebody not being in line within your organization. So, establishing a solid culture with, agreed upon core values that everybody, pitches in when it comes to developing, and the buy-in to the brand and the big, picture behind what you do. And if you don't have those people on board, there's some risk there, because, we all have to dance a pretty fine line every single day. And if somebody's just out there doing the cha-cha, your things, aren't going to turn out that way. So it's really important to, stay in touch with your teams when it comes to what your big picture goals are. Express and identify and communicate, right, when there is something that goes on, the impacts, right, of a failure in whatever area, the impacts of not knowing, or the impacts of not caring, right, and how that big picture will shape your organization, right, when it comes to, hey, what's the bottom line look like? So always make sure that, you're staying in tune with your team through positive reinforcement, right, a commitment to them as your leaders, and always try to visioneer, right, future risks, right, and put proactive plans into place so that you're not reactive to them. So it was really good stuff that I gathered out of the safety forum. Those were kind of the bigger highlights. The OSHA Focus 4 looks like that came out was falls, struck bys, electrocutions, and caught betweens. Okay, so those were the really big hitters that OSHA identified as their focus 4, because those are the ones, right, that I think had the most impact in last year's stats. So make sure we're paying attention to those.
Hey,
And
Paul,
I'll make sure we get everything started here. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Shelby.
can we pause real quick on that? I don't know the Colorado stats. I know the Texas stats for electrocution, and if you want me to pull those for you, I can. But out of the 7 people that were electrocuted last year, 2023, in Texas, what is it? 4 of them, I think, yeah, 4 of them were tree trimmers and a water facility person that hit a power line. One of them was a warehouse dude who should never have been doing electrical work, and 2 of them were actually electricians. One of them was union, one of them was not. I don't know if those stats.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and that's God dang it. You know what I mean? It's always
Yeah.
unfortunate to hear about any safety incident, right? Especially electrocutions, and when you find out that it was done, due to competence levels or negligence, right? When it comes to, say, all those individuals that weren't electricians, and for those individuals that were electricians, right? Hopefully, well, it didn't work out, but you'd be curious to say, hey, what protocols or what administrative or engineering controls weren't in place, right, to ensure that they're covered next time for sure.
And
So
that's when I spoke for an hour and a half at Safety Summit on training. That was part of my big focus on it was as electricians, we tend to focus, and I'm not an electrician, I'm just electrical safety, but as electricians, we tend to focus on electricity and only electricity because electricity is the electron that'll kill the electrical. And then we forget about everything else. We forget about the office staff, and they need training too. Those are like ladders and fire extinguishers, and they need stuff as well.
Yeah.
That's where when the
Yeah.
majority of the Texas electrocutions are not electricians, there had to be an electrician somewhere.
Well, safety is an ethic, right? Safety is a
Yes.
culture, right? And so that's kind of the message that really I got at the national this year is it's really an ethic and a culture. So I think we can all do a little bit better to connect our resources, right? Do a little bit more diving into our administrative controls and visioneer some risk management. You know what I mean? Put some things in place. So great discussion this morning. Very awesome stuff and something that we can take away here at IEC Rocky Mountain and pinpoint some strategy on. So good conversation. I want to go ahead and get to our
Hey,
forum
Paul, can you
session.
hear me real quick?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Hey, so kind of circle back. I'm driving the Western Slope. I couldn't unpause my phone quick enough.
Okay. Well, be
But with
safe, man.
yeah, right. No, so with some of the safety documents that we do for tracking is I'll open up a Google Drive doc for each job. And then that way
Share
the
it to
foreman
people.
yep, so the foreman has access to that drive where he can put in his daily reports and then any safety or any tracking of what went on that job. We have that Google Drive that sits for 5-6 years in case something pops up. The other thing we use is this website called OWYN Safety,
What was
which
it again?
you can OWYN Safety. It's kind of like I call it OWN, but spelled weird. But with that, you can actually send your employees for certain types of training as well. And that's
Oh,
tracked and you
that's
can actually
cool.
put that down. I think it's like $1,000 a year or something like that, but you can update all your safety books, everything else too as well. Pull a
So
bunch
it's
of
a
safety
service, huh?
training.
It's a service.
Yeah, it's a service.
I'm sorry, Matt.
But
One more time with the name. I'm going to try and get it into the chat. You kind of cut out on me for a sec.
let me see. Let me make sure I'm saying it right. Let me pull it back up real quick.
Well, you know what? The links, Holly sent the link. So we got it in the chat, brother. Don't worry about trying to
Oh,
find
okay.
it. We got it.
Perfect. Sweet.
Thank you so
We
much,
good.
Holly. And everybody, Holly's in the background. She always does great minutes and notes, and so we're super thankful to ensure that these are recorded, right? And she's quick with the links, and so thank you so much, Holly. And thank you, Matt, for that resource. We'll take a look at that too.
Not a problem.
And that's perfect for your smaller contractors, right? That doesn't have that person that can be a roamer, right? And can you know hit all those check boxes when it comes to the job sites.
So I think it maybe small to medium, but then you
Yeah.
come to like a larger contractor like Encore or Wayfield. Like I'm pretty sure they wished one of those guys would be in this chat with us because they probably tell us what kind of system they use or how to keep tracking and everything else that would help maybe streamline so it's kind of like a industry standard that we kind of use the same thing. Kind of like with hospitals, you go to the doctor's office, all the hospitals intertwine with information on your file where they can pull up your medical. So maybe there's a way electrical safety can kind of do that same thing other than using Procore and 17 other different apps that each GC wants to use. But just
I
throwing it out
love
there.
the idea. I love the idea. I think that, you know, dynamic minds can make things happen. And so I love the idea. I think that if there's not something out there already, I think that, you know, I think there's some opportunities. So very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that resource, man. I really appreciate it. And hey, it's great to hear your voice, man. We miss you. Very cool. Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and sorry, I know that we're running a little bit long, but it's all been great stuff. So great, impactful things to take back. I want to introduce Aaron with OSHA. Once again, he is a compliance, safety, and health officer with OSHA out of the Denver office, and he has an awesome presentation put together and good overview of what you all as contractors or general contractors or really anybody out there, right? Because it's OSHA, needs to know when it comes to confined space, limited access or limited retreat, you know, or limited entry, limited exit. scenarios, whether or not it's it's a permitted confined space or not. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us and spending time with our safety forum this morning. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you unless anybody has any other questions. Perfect.
Good to go. Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Like Paul mentioned earlier, my name's Aaron Daub. I'm from the Denver area office. I'm a safety specialist at the Denver office, and I've been working for OSHA for going on 5-6 years now out of the Denver office. And today I'm going to go into a confined space presentation that our compliance assistant specialist, Meredith, I think you guys are familiar with her. She couldn't be here today. So I'm stepping in to give this presentation. I have a little bit of a background through OSHA and some of the cases I've done myself involving confined space. And then I also have a lot of previous knowledge from my previous employments when it comes to confined space. So throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions. I'll try to bring up some of my past experiences with the confined space into the presentation. And then I'll also ask you guys as well if you have any previous experience, whether it's just a regular confined space or a permit required confined space, and what you guys have seen in the field as electricians and contractors, because every day we're dealing with a lot of different industry, from construction to general industry across the board. So it's hard for us to keep it straight. We typically look to you guys when it comes to subject matter, and you guys are the subject experts, especially for electrical. We don't have a lot of specialists when it comes to electrical in our office anymore. So I'm sure I'll probably have questions for you guys as well as we go through the presentation. But like I said, throughout the presentation, feel free to jump in. I'll have the chat pulled up if you have any questions as we go along. And then at the end, we'll open it up to questions as well. Whether it pertains to confined space or any other safety and health questions you guys have, feel free to jump in and let me know, and we'll try to discuss it and answer it to the best of my knowledge. If not, I'll definitely get back to you with an answer to your question.
Would it be possible, Aaron, to get this your presentation that you're going to do today so we can send it out to our group?
Yes, and Meredith had already talked to me about that as well. It won't be out today because she won't be available the rest of the day, but she said she will send it to you first thing tomorrow morning because she has to convert it to a PDF and then send it out. So once I send it to her, she'll be able to send it to you first thing tomorrow morning, and then you could send it out to anyone and everyone that's participated.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, we'll go ahead and I'll pull up my presentation, and hopefully this works. Can everyone see this?
Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we'll get started. Like I said, I'm a safety specialist. We're going into confined space today. Majority of the presentation's really going to touch on the points of permit required confined space, but I'll also keep it open to just regular confined space, because a lot of the times you guys will run in, especially into the field, there'll be a lot of markings and confined space that are marked and labeled out in the field. That'll just be confined space, but we'll talk about reclassification and how a confined space turns into permit required confined space and vice versa later on in the presentation as well. This is something just OSHA vision, I think, that Meredith in our office wants to touch on. Our vision for OSHA is that safety is a core value across your company, not just on a site-by-site basis. OSHA wants you guys, electrical contractors, want your safety culture to include all employees equally, so everyone's on the same page, all the way from temporary, permanent employees, all the way up to management. So that's kind of our vision for OSHA, and we'll get into it. So as far as confined space is is basically what is a confined space. We're going to get into more of this, and like I said, it's going to be more permit required confined space. But just as far as a confined space in itself is the area large enough for a worker to enter? Typically, it's going to have a limited means of entry and exit, and is not designed for continuous occupancy, meaning that you have workers in there, they're not supposed to be in there for a time weighted average of like an 8-hour work shift. And some of the confined spaces where they usually found, these are sewers, pits, tanks, crawl spaces, attics. And I kind of wanted to open it up to you guys as well. When it comes to electrical and the contractors, is there anything that you guys deal with that you would think is considered a confined space when it pertains to electricians?
The biggest fight I've had on job sites is underneath the GC trailer.
GC trailer, okay. Okay, and that's gonna fall under like some of those crawl spaces. And I know there's times I even mentioned with Paul, but there's a lot of electrical vaults and manholes, utility tunnels, stuff that electricians and contractors like yourselves are going to be dealing with when it comes to confined space. And like I said, not all the time are those going to be considered permit required confined space, but they should be marked as a confined space. And that's something that's going to come down to the employer or the competent person, depending on what industry you're working in, whether it's construction or general industry. That's something that you'll look into. And then these are the hazards. So this is pretty much what contributes a confined space turning into a permit required confined space. So as soon as you introduce one of these hazards, it doesn't have to be all four. All our standard requires is that one of these four, or if not one or more, is actually introduced into the confined space, which is going to reclassify that confined space as a permit required confined space, which is going to go down a whole rabbit hole of things that the employer needs to do and put in place for that to be a permit required confined space in order for employees or entrants to actually access it. So if it's something that needs to be accessed, it has to have a permit required confined space program that is going to be implemented by the employer. But these are just some of the hazards. We'll definitely touch on a lot of the hazards going throughout the presentations, from atmospheric hazardous atmospheres that you're going to deal with, low oxygen, excessive oxygen. That's going to fall in between that less than 19.5% to the 23.5% over is your low oxygen or excessive oxygen, to where you'll actually need to have some form of SCBA apparatus in order to provide you oxygen, whether it's temporary, you're on a bottle system, or you're actually a full, you're fed full oxygen as well. Then as far as electrical, you're going to get into those as well. Explosive hazards, arc flashing, when it comes to electrical hazards. And like you guys had mentioned before, it's our focus 4, and it's one of the bigger hazards when it comes to confined space and how we classify those of a permit required confined space. And this is something that we're going to go into what employers must do as far as the confined space. And like I said, that it's split into two because we do have two different standards, one for construction and one for general industry. So I have a flow chart, and also I have a side-by-side that I could also share with Paul and share with you guys, but it shows both of the standards side-by-side, and they're almost identical. There's a couple wording issues that differentiate between both of our standards, and this is one of them, especially in the construction rule. It's going to mention a competent person is the one who needs to identify existing and probable hazards. Unlike our general industry, and stuff that you guys will be dealing with as well, it just puts that term on the employer. So instead of a competent person in general industry, it'll be the employer or qualified person. So it's just a matter of wording when it comes to our different standards, but they're very similar, especially throughout the whole standard that it's up to the employer that they need to go in there and distinguish whether or not they're in construction or they're in general industry. And that comes down to new construction and maintenance. So there's a lot of interp letters that we have as well that will discuss and cover some of those distinctions, but it's nothing that you guys should really have to worry about because most of the time it's going to be pretty easily to define what standard you guys are going to be looking into. As far as the employer has determined that the worker performed in these permit spaces must develop a permit required confined space. So if workers will not perform work in these spaces, the employer must ensure that the workers are prevented from entering the permit spaces. And that is also different. Typically, they're barricaded or there's a barrier that's marked confined space or permit required confined space. So it has to be labeled and marked and barricaded off to prevent employees from entering those spaces, especially if they're not going to be permitted to work in those areas. So that's something that you guys will see quite often at some of the job sites. Is a lot of those areas will be marked off and labeled confined space or permit required confined space. And it's typically just to keep most regular employees from entering those spaces, especially if it's a permit required confined space. All right, so now we're just going into permit required confined space and the program that I talked about. This is going to be up to the employer to really identify and evaluate the hazards that they find in this confined space. And typically, this is going to be something that most employers are going to identify on a new job site or an existing, whether it's construction, general industry. It's always going to be identified as finding every confined space on that job site and then classifying it as a regular confined space that meets the definition, or is it going to be a permit required confined space? And as soon as it's classified as a permit required confined space, this program has to be implemented. And it goes into procedures, practices needed for safe entry. You're going to do a lot of testing, which we'll go into. You're going to do monitoring the air and testing the air to determine what kind of hazardous atmosphere that you have in there, if that's one of the hazards. The other ones are going to go into engulfments, whether you're in a grain silo, something that can engulf the employee from entering that space, which also is going to introduce some hazardous atmosphere. Then there's trapping, asphyxiation. That just could be the configuration of the space that as soon as you enter and break the plane of, say, the hatch or the opening or that entrance, the configuration, you slide down 10 feet and you're unable to get out of that space, and there's no access to exit. And then any other safety and health hazard that could be identified is also something that's going to turn it and make it into a permit required confined space. Okay, and this just goes into a lot of the program elements of permit required confined space. How the employer will isolate the PRCS and physical hazards within the space if needed. Like I said, atmospheric conditions. Let's keep going to the program elements. Okay, so as far as the program elements, when I was talking earlier, whether and how the employer will purge, inert, flush, or ventilate the permit space. So that's going to go into a slide or two later, is how we monitor and determine that space. So a big one when it comes to purging, say there is a flammable liquid or a vapor that's either at the top or the bottom of a a confined space. That needs to be purged out. And there's some ways to purge those out, whether, especially when it comes to flammable vapors, purging a lot of that out really comes into nitrogen purging. So anytime there's a flammable, they use nitrogen to purge out that area. But when doing so, you're also going to incorporate another hazard into that confined space, which means it's now going to be a low oxygen atmosphere inside that confined space. So you may eliminate one hazard, but you're also introducing another hazard at the same time. So that's something that the employer, the competent person, everyone has to be aware of when you are determining these different hazards, because your ultimate goal is to try to eliminate or implement an engineering control for these spaces. But you have to make sure that you're calculating for every situation that can occur when you're entering that space, especially if it's something that you're doing multiple times, whether it's once a week, once a month, annually, anything like that. That's why this program and these elements need to be met when it comes to confined space, because it's very adamant that conditions will change, and purging, inerting, flushing, ventilating the spaces is something that you're trying to do to eliminate or control the atmosphere hazards. And that's also pretty much trying to get your employees to where they're down to the least amount of PPE that they need to go into this space in order to eliminate other hazards as far as heat stress and guys falling out, not having to have to wear SCBA or a half face with cartridges. Something that if you can eliminate the hazard and keep it ventilated, that's just going to make the job easier for the entrance going into the confined space, and also give you more time to work in that space without having any employees be exposed to any of these hazards for a time-weighted average. Any questions so far as program elements, anything into confined space, permit required? Nothing? Okay, we'll keep going. More into program elements, ways the employer will verify that conditions in the confined space are safe for entry throughout entry operations. This is something that, like I said, monitoring the confined space, whether it's with a VOC meter, a 4-gas meter, like I dealt with before in my previous experience with the Department of Defense. We were dealing with chemical mustard agents and VX nerve agents. So a lot of the times we had a CFM that we actually had to hook up to and have real-time analytical platform monitoring. So that's continuous monitoring that is typically the best, especially when in industrial monitoring like that, it is going to be your best option, but it's also not going to always be readily accessible for most employers. It is the best case scenario because you can continuously monitor the air, even if you have a ventilation system, a CFM sucking out that hazardous, toxic chemical, anything that's in there. It all comes down to what the employer is going to have in place to verify that. And all the employees are welcome to monitor and also see those results for monitoring before an entrant goes in. Every entrant and representative can see those monitoring results and discuss to make sure that atmosphere is down to a permissible entry level, to make sure that they can work in that atmosphere and not be exposed to a hazard and overexposed as far as that. And then as you go down the line from eliminating to engineering controls, it comes down to your safety equipment and making sure that the entrants are provided with appropriate PPE. And that's going to differ from what industry you're in, especially when it comes to electricians and what type of work that they're going to be using, work that they're going to be conducting. Your guys' PPE is also going to differ when it comes to that as well. And then going more into it, examples of required equipment, like I said, testing and monitoring equipment, ventilation, communication, whether that's two-way radios, signaling systems. It's just going to be situation based on communication. It definitely makes it harder in some of these confined spaces. But it's all going to be put out into this program. So the employer is going to lay it out in the program and also in the permits, discussing that there's constant communication between the entrance, the attendants, and then also supervision on site, whether they're doing entry as well or they're supervising outside with the attendants that are attending to the people that are going in the confined space. PPE and then lighting equipment. This goes into one of our standards. Typically, depending on the situation, we refer to it as foot candles. So like construction, it's 5-foot candles for lighting in some situations. Warehouses is 5-foot candles. There's first aid situations to where I think it's 10 or 20-foot light foot candles. So that's kind of what this goes into, and that's something that you guys as electricians might come in contact with, because there are new confined spaces, permit required confined spaces that need intrinsically safe lighting throughout their confined space, and that's something that you guys could be in charge with installing. And that's going to be up to whether the contractor, you're gonna meet with the employer and go over their permit required confined space and have to meet everything in that permit prior to breaking the plane of that entrance. And that's something that you guys could also be a part of is lighting equipment, but that's something that we require when it comes to these confined spaces to make sure that you can see when you're entering and working throughout a confined space. If not, you're going to create more hazards, trip hazards, stuff like that, engulfment, trapping hazards, if there's not efficient lighting. And then equipment, ladders, etc., needed for safe entry and exits. That just depends on how far you have to get up to the entry. Like I said, if you're getting up on top of a silo, going in, opening a hatch, that's something that this program has to be in place and the permit has to be met before you even open the hatch and before you break the plane, because there's a lot of the times we have people fall out, especially on fuel silos and fuel tanks, people opening the hatch without following procedure and falling out and being succumbed to the fumes as they come out of those hatches. So that's something that's always you need to take into consideration when entering some of these confined space and knowing the hazards that are going to be on the other side of that entry door. Okay, evaluation during entry, another part of the program elements. Like I said, testing, continuous monitoring. It's not always going to be available for a lot of those atmospheric hazards. And like it states in the presentation, it's not always going to be commercially available, but they do have portable handheld VOC meters, 4-gas meters, depending on what you're being exposed to, whether it's ammonia, chlorine, some of these other chemicals that is also displayed out. And a lot of these chemicals are going to be put up in our tables. I think it's 1910, 1000 when it comes to a lot of the toxic and chemical substances. Table Z1 through Z3 are going to mention a lot of these when it comes to monitoring and what the permissible exposure limit is and what it needs to be monitored to, whether it's parts per million. It could be 10, could be 1,000, just depends on the chemical, what you're being exposed to. That's something that needs to be evaluated prior to going into the confined space. And more into it, if you don't have continuous monitoring, the employer is going to pretty much implement a way that they have to have periodic monitoring throughout the entrance going inside the confined space, and testing it to the extent possible that they can. And then they're also supposed to provide an early warning system that continuously monitors for engulfment hazards and alerts entrance of hazards as well for them to safely exit. There are monitoring systems. I'm not sure how often they're used, but they are meant for a early warning system, or it's an alert system that goes off if an employee inside a confined space is no longer moving and it's a motion alert. Those are also something that can be used as far as entry, and we'll go into that as well when it comes to rescue and a lot of those conditions. And this goes more to atmospheric testing, monitoring. Okay. Sorry, I just have to move this space. Okay. And then this is provide at least one attendant to monitor permit spaces. Discuss what to do if an attendant must monitor more than one space at a time. Discuss each role employees will fulfill and ensuring that each employee assigned a role is provided training for that role, whether you're an entrant, attendant, entry supervisor, or the atmospheric monitor. Okay, and then rescue is another part of the rescue elements. You need to list procedures for summoning rescue and emergency services, including procedures for emergency assistance in the event of a rescue system. Okay. And I just wanted to ask, is anyone familiar with the Cabin Creek fire that happened, I think in 2007 through Excel Energy? Is anyone aware of that?
I remember something about it, but I couldn't get any details.
Okay, and that's just something, and if you guys are familiar with the Chemical Safety Board, CSB, they're the ones that do a lot of these investigations into some of these catastrophes that happen. And that's kind of going into the rescue part. Cabin Creek fire, it was in October, I think, of 2007. And that just goes into the part of the rescue, because there was multiple things that led up to the 5 contractors that got trapped. I think it was 1,600.
Yeah, that's that long tunnel one with the fire, and they were caught behind it, right?
Yes, it was the Penstock in Georgetown, Colorado. So it's a Penstock.
Yeah, that was atrocious.
Yeah, so it went from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir, and they were recoding the Penstock inside. So it was a painting contractor contracted through Excel Energy, and there was a lot of things that went into, especially Excel Energy. I think they were deficient when it came to actually selecting their contractors, and it was the cheaper way to go, but the contractor didn't have a lot of their safety programs in place. And the biggest thing that it came down to for this one was there was no rescue emergency services on site. So a rescue team wasn't provided and wasn't on site. And they said through CSB, you can look it up, but they said one of the reasons that the 5 employees succumbed to asphyxiation was mainly because they could have been rescued 45 minutes to an hour earlier. So that is one big thing when it comes to this program in a permit required confined space, is having a rescue service, emergency service on site, trained, prepared for anything that could happen. And that was the biggest thing for that Penstock incident was if they would have had emergency services there that were trained and knew what kind of chemicals and hazardous atmospheres they were dealing with, could have gone in there, fought the fire, and rescued the entrants that were inside. But yeah, it came down to 5 of the employees got stuck, had to go all the way to the bottom part of the steepest part of the pipe, and they couldn't get up the Penstock because it was too steep, and ended up succumbing to asphyxiation because of the smoke that had built up in the pipe. And they tried the local fire department tried to give SCBA tanks and masks down the top of the penstock, but it was too late. So that's why I try to always bring that one up, because we actually had someone out of our office do that inspection. So I always try to bring it up that rescue is a huge part of permit required confined space, and it's something that has to be on the permit and also has to be in the program that needs to be implemented by the employer, whether it is employees that are hired and work for the employer, or it is a third party rescue service, whatever they seem fit. But they need to have that every time they go into a permit required confined space. And this is to discuss the system for issuing, use, and cancellation of permits. You'll see this in construction when it comes to pausing and cancellation of permits. Then discuss the procedures for coordinating entry operations in consultation with the controlling contractor when more than one employer will perform work at that affects the area. Oops, sorry. Okay, and yeah, so this is going to fall basically under the construction side of things, just depending on how many contractors are involved, whether there's going to be multiple contractors going into a confined space that they need. Typically, this is not the case, but you will run into it. But everyone needs to be on the same procedures for entering and exiting the confined space. And it's up to the employer that is in charge, whether it's the GC that has that procedure in place for the confined space, needs to make sure that it filters all the way down to all the subs that are going to be affected by that confined space. Discuss procedures for review of the program when incidents or near misses reveal deficiencies in the program. This is going to go into a lot of the annual training, especially if it's a confined space that is required to be entered multiple times a year. This has to be reviewed in the program of incidents, near misses, just like any other thing that we deal with OSHA, and especially you guys being contractors. Near misses are a big thing that definitely reveal a lot of deficiencies, and it's better to report them and discuss them and communicate any near misses, just because it's something that will help to grow your program and eliminate any hazards for the foreseeable future. Okay, alternative entry procedures. This is going to be for a lot of the different procedures. A permit space where the only hazard is atmospheric. Sorry, guys, I have to keep moving the camera because there are no physical hazards, or physical hazards have been eliminated, isolated to prevent worker exposure. And this is just going to come down to no need for a permit or program so long as the employer provided sufficient continuous forced air ventilation to eliminate the atmospheric hazard, and continuous monitoring must be used unless the employer can show it is not available, in which case periodic monitoring must be used with sufficient frequency to ensure workers have time to exit safely. Okay, this goes into reclassification. So this is kind of on the backboard of the last slide as well. But when it comes into reclassification, I had mentioned earlier, a confined space, a lot of them will be marked, but it depends on what is being added to that confined space that could reclassify it as a permit required confined space. Kind of going back to the Excel Energy, just as an example, it was already classified as a confined space, a permit required confined space. But just what was added, they had flammable chemicals, painting chemicals, that was one of the main results for that fire that happened at the Cabin Creek fire. They were having a lot of problems with the buildup on the walls of the penstock, and had to clear out all their lines, and a lot of those fumes built up within the space that the workers were going to, and then just static electricity was what caused that fire to start. So it's any type of ignition source, even static, is something that is a big concern. But say this wasn't an actual permit required confined space, as soon as you introduce a hazard or a new situation, whether it be a chemical or a tool, something that could ultimately lead to disrupting the atmosphere, or could turn it into an engulfment, whether you're working with the walls and a wall could collapse, anything like that, that you try to you add to that confined space is going to reclassify it as a permit required confined space. The same with reclassifying a permit required confined space to just a confined space. Depends on what you do. Is if you can fully eliminate the atmospheric hazard and the engulfment hazard, that no longer is going to be a permit required confined space, as long as you can provide that we are ventilating and monitoring that space 24/7 and are never going to get anything that is beyond the exposure limits. If that is provided, then that can also be reclassified as a confined space instead of a permit required confined space.
Yeah, we had to do that, Aaron, for our building.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we had to, when we first built our building and we were tearing out walls and things like that. We're in an old bowling alley, right?
Mhm.
So underneath where we have our classrooms and things like that, it's all a floating floor.
Yep.
And so when we bought the building, we had to run electrical through there for floor boxes, right, and all different types of stuff. And they evaluated. That was right when OSHA came out with the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in the area, even our first responders, hadn't even done like an extraction or on-site, right, readiness training.
Yes.
So we got to use the new facility. It was our first training class we ever had here at IEC Rocky Mountain, was a confined space training with our first response or first responder teams, and all of the construction workers on site got to play victims that day, right? They were pulling them out, extracting them, doing different things like that. But one of the requirements was that we had to we installed just permanent ventilation down there, right? To eliminate, that need of having to have a permitted confined space. And so we had to make provisions to eliminate that hazard.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's something I dealt with as well through Department of Defense. Is once we could get in and have that fully monitored and verify that there was no leaking munitions, no other atmospheric hazard in the space, we could go in without an M40 mask on to actually do what we needed to do as far as account for the rounds inside. And do some of that, but it's something. As soon as you eliminate or introduce an engineering control that can basically eliminate that hazard from that space, it's going to be reclassified as a confined space. But it's also going to help, especially when it goes to people entering those confined spaces, just because the less you eliminate and the less engineering controls you have in place, the more you're going to rely on PPE when it comes to like SCBA and full hazmat gear. That's something that's also going to put a strain on your employees. You're going to have less time to access that space. You could go from being able to work in that space continuously to maybe working in that space for less than 15 minutes, especially if you're using SCBA, any type of respirator protection. So that's why we try to eliminate and implement engineering controls as much as possible, just because it puts less stress on the employees that are actually having to go into these spaces, and gives you more time to adequately get your work done and do it as safely as possible. Okay. What needs to be on the permit? This is the space to which the permit applies, the purpose of the entry, the date and duration of the permit, the names or other designation of the authorized entrance, and then methods used to detect increased hazards, atmospheric conditions. And this is what I had talked about earlier. This is everything that we look at in the standard that needs to be on the permit when the permit is considered for a permit required confined space. Name of attendants, name of entry supervisors, hazards in the space, and measures used to eliminate or control permit space hazards, acceptable entry conditions, results of atmospheric tests and monitoring, and names, initials of testers, and dates of testing. And that's all for accountability of people going inside, attendance on the outside, and supervision as well. And the dates are very important of when that testing is done to make sure that it is being monitored and tested prior to entrance going into that confined space. Rescue emergency services is a big one that is also going to come up on the permit, whether it's in-house or third party. There's a lot of training and stuff that goes into that. Communication procedures used by entrants and attendants during entry, equipment necessary for entry, and then any additional permits such as hot work issued to authorize work being performed in the space. And that's another one, like I said, it's you're adding another hazard to the confined space. So it's going to require another additional permit that's also going to be on this confined space permit prior to anyone going into that space. And now we'll go into training. Employer must provide to each affected employee at no cost to the employee in a language and vocabulary that employee can understand before the employee is assigned duties, before there is a change in assigned duties, whenever there is a change in permit space, entry operations for which the employee has not been trained, and whenever there is a deviation from the permit space entry procedure, or there are deficiencies in the employee's knowledge or use of these procedures. And this is what the training will cover. Hazards in the permit space, whether it's atmospheric, engulfment, trapping, those are going to be number one when it comes to what you're training about and how you're going to isolate, control them. Dangers of unauthorized rescue, proficiency in the duties required by the standard, and any other revised procedures as necessary. How do we know that the training occurred? This is something that needs to be documented. It's just like any other inspection we do with OSHA. We're always going to look for documentation, and this one is something that is required for employers to maintain training records. And they also need to be available to any employee and representative as well. But this is what we're going to look at when we review a permit required confined space program. Is there training in everyone that's trained? Because an entrant or an attendant can't be affected by the confined space if they've never been trained to go into that confined space. And this goes into the entrance that I've been talking about. Authorized entrants need to know the hazards, need to know how to use safety equipment, need to communicate with the attendants that are going to be on the outside of the confined space. And then they must alert that attendant if there's indication of exposure. And that's something that if there is an engineering control or something, or they have a ventilation system that's properly running, if that cuts out at any time while they are inside that confined space, they need to alert the attendant and evacuate as soon as possible. And then attendants, they're, like I said, they're on the outside of the confined space of the entry. Whether or not they can see the entrance or not, they need to have communication with them to assess the status. And like I said, communication is going to be different from radios to hand signals, something that they can constantly have an open communication while that person is inside the confined space. They also order the entrance to evacuate if a condition occurs, prohibited condition, behavioral effects of exposure are apparent. If you have a guy fall out, is getting nauseous, sick, is not responding, they need to be pulled out immediately anytime they're in a confined space. Permit required confined space. Attendants also in charge of summoning rescue and other emergency services. They should be there on site. It's also going to be dependent on the situation and what the confined space is and how often you guys are doing it. But when it comes to the permit required, they need to have these rescue and emergency services on site, ready to act. They must perform non-entry rescue as specified by the program, performs no duties that might interfere with attendant duties. And then entry supervisors, these are the supervisors overseeing the whole operation from entry to exit. They must know the hazards as well, must verify that all the tests specified by the permit have been conducted and that the permit procedures and equipment are in place before allowing entry to begin. So that they're going to verify all those tests, all the monitoring, make sure everything's below the exposure limits. And even when it comes to oxygen and depending on what PPE they're using, that all has to be on the permit and verified before anyone enters the confined space. And they must terminate entry and cancel suspended permits in the event of work completion, prohibited conditions, or emergency services. And also the supervisors need to verify availability of rescue services, remove unauthorized entrance, and also must determine that entry operations are consistent with the terms of the entry permit and that acceptable entry conditions are maintained throughout the entry. Okay, and non-entry rescue must be provided unless it is infeasible. So a lot of the entrants will have a full body harness with a retrieval line, especially if they are being lowered or going into an entrance that they can't be fully visual. But this is non-entry rescue in a lot of situations that we've dealt with, especially a lot of silos and vaults where people are going into these permit required confined spaces. They need to have that full body harness just in case something happens and they need to be rescued. They have a full body harness with a retrieval line that is by the attendant, and that rescue service can use that to remove them from that space immediately if there is no response or something happens. They can be pulled out immediately for a non-entry rescue to expose another employee to the hazard. And then there's entry rescue. Like I said, it's going to be situational based on what type of confined space that they're entering and the configurations of that entry. Employers must evaluate an entry rescue service to ensure it can respond in a timely manner, perform rescue in the specific permit spaces identified, reach victims in a time frame appropriate for the hazards. It's something that's also another big point, depending on what kind of hazard you're dealing with, whether it be an engulfment, atmospheric. There's different vapors and stuff that are going to be higher, that are lighter vapors that are inside that condition. And if something happens where an engineering control fails, they need to have that in place in a timely effort to make sure that that entrant is out of there in a timely manner. Rescuers, an employer whose worker will perform rescue must, at no cost to the employees, provide the necessary PPE, train each employee on how to perform assigned rescue duties, and then train each employee in basic first aid and CPR. Ensure each employee practices rescue before attempting an actual rescue, and at least every 12 months. So it's definitely going to be something that is annual when it comes to rescue, and also training for PRCS. Okay. And here is the OSHA compliance assistance. This is something that I'm sure Meredith has brought it up in some of the previous presentations, but a lot of the compliance assistance is all going to be directed towards her. So I'm sure you guys, this is her contact information, but she's our compliance assistant specialist. So any questions related to that, you can reach out to her. Any questions so far as confined space? We can open it up now if anyone has questions.
No, I really liked, and thanks for bringing up that fire, man. That's a really good example of all this to consider. I really liked. It's very tragic, but man, thanks for bringing that back up. That was good.
Yeah, and I typically I always bring it up just because it's something that is relevant. Yeah, it happens years ago, and it's also made up for us as OSHA to incorporate a lot of different standards and stuff when it comes to confined space, and that's why it's good for us to work with CSB and some of these other contractors to really evaluate a lot of our past incidents that we can discuss and go over and try to implement corrective action, whether it be to our standard or procedures when it comes to confined space rescue services. But that's always one to just keep in the back of your mind. It really came down to complacency, both from the GC and the contractor themselves. And that's the biggest concern when it comes to permit required confined spaces. Like I said, anything can happen at a given time, and if you don't have procedures in place to deal with those situations, things can go downhill very fast and tragically. So that's what we try to avoid. And when we're out in the field and we're looking through a lot of these programs for permit required confined space, and a lot of the job sites that even have just regular confined space, as soon as you add something, an additional hazard that falls under one of those conditions, it definitely changes that confined space, and how the employer has to handle it going into the future. Things always change on job sites. I'm sure you guys are well aware of it. Dealing with electrical, it's something that I try to avoid when it comes to inspections. Electrical's a huge monster in itself, and it's something that we look at. Is, like I said, it's one of the focus fours for a reason. It's very dangerous. It's something that you guys are dealing with on a daily basis, and a lot of your employees. And us for OSHA, we just like to have just like this presentation, this talk, roundtable discussions. The more partnerships and things that we can make with OSHA, with other contractors and general contractors, it just brings more discussion to a lot of these big ticket items when it comes to hazards. Because our number one, especially in Colorado, is falls and trenching. So we have emphasis programs for a reason, especially with struck by, caught in between, electrical hazards. We have emphasis programs for a reason. We just want to be able to reach out to all the contractors that we can on both ends of the spectrum to make sure that we can really relate when it comes to safety and health, because there are a lot of good contractors out there that take safety and health very seriously, but it's the stragglers that we have the problem with, and we're trying to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that, Aaron. And also for those contractors, I mean, something you could take away today and get to your team were those OSHA quick links. Okay, you can get the app. Okay, so that way, and share that with your professionals out there, right? So when they're going into a situation, or they just, if they need a quick checkpoint, right? You don't have to call the office on a safety, on a safety, say, advice, right? They can go right to that OSHA quick take and kind of look up what they're doing and go, okay, these are some things that we need to pay attention to. So great resources, great information, Aaron. Thank you so much, man. A lot of information in there. And ultimately, we've had to run into, confined space issues here at this campus. Like I said, it was our first class that we had here was confined space class, and it's something that is becoming more and more prevalent in our industry, right? And being able to establish those parameters and getting that out to your team, evaluate and assess the situation, and really determine, hey, what are those hazards in that space, and have a great JSA and an administrative control in place to take care of that. So thank you so much. Any last questions from the group for Aaron? Thank you so much. Before we part, just wanted to go over the remaining schedule of the year. Okay. We're so thankful for OSHA, because this is the third OSHA appearance for our safety forum this year. So OSHA, you guys really you're great supporters, and we got a great relationship with y'all. And I know our contractors and industry partners are super appreciative of your time and getting us information that we need to know. So always a huge thank you to OSHA. Thanks, Aaron, and extend this thank you to Meredith, because she's been very communicative and sends me your guys' newsletters and things like that. So huge thank you to Aaron and the OSHA team for coming and spending time this morning. And for the remaining safety sessions that we have for 2024. In October, we're going to go over temp, power, and lighting, what we need to know for a safety aspect on that. And then we're going to, in November, we normally don't have a November safety forum because of everybody's traveling and things like that, but we are this year, and that's going to be our 2025 scheduling. It's going to be a round table. We won't really have a presenter, but I've got some strategies and I got some ideas for 2025. That'll be a little bit different than how we do it today, but that'll be where we kind of discuss the strategy for the following year. And then in December, we're going to go over winter driving for your fleet and what they need to know out there on the roads whenever you're in a company van, company vehicle, company truck, things like that when it comes to the condition of your vehicle, maintenance, proper securing and strapping, things like that. So that's the rest of the schedule. If you haven't already, hey, we got a golf tournament tomorrow. So if you're attending, we want to say thank you for doing that. Reach out to us at IECRM if you have any needs. Okay, we appreciate everybody's time, and unless anybody has anything else to say or to cover, I'm going to go ahead and give the rest of your morning back to you. Good, Joe. Good, Shelby. Good to see you. Yeah. Bruce, thanks for joining. Matt, always a pleasure, man. Thanks for joining us. And Aaron, thank you so much, man, for spending time with us and dropping some knowledge on all of us.
All right, thank you for having us. And if you just want to extend out to everyone and give them my contact information, it's a lot easier for contractors and people to reach out to us personally, us guys out in the field. If not, because reaching out to our office is, you're just going to get a voicemail and you might not get a response for a week or two. So Paul, if you just want to share that information with my email and my cell phone number, if you guys have any questions, like I said, related to confined space or anything safety and health related, feel free to give me a call and let me know, and we can discuss it at any time. We're on call 24/7, so feel free to reach out.
Thank you. And for the group, right, once Aaron and Meredith are able to get me the presentation, we'll send you all of the links that we've compiled today, some cliff notes, the recording, and Aaron and Meredith's contact information, so that you are in the know and you have a resource to reach out to if questions do come up. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Reach out to me if you need anything, have any questions or suggestions, and we'll see you in October.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Matt. Good, Matt?
I'm good.
Right on. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
All right.
Excited to start the new year with the online teaching part.
How, what's that?
I said I was hoping still be able to do the teaching for the late start, but doing online instead of in class like we discussed last year.
You tell me what night you want, brother.
Any night that you want me to do it.
Hold on, now I got you online. Let me stop this.